tonight. This study was part of Make It New Tech, our economic development study and strategy for 2023 and 2027. In the strategy, it was highlighted that we needed to create and support healthy commercial districts, so our downtowns, and that the town needed to play a role in that to help create more activities, create more community culture, because our downtowns are the vibrant part of our area. So using the information we obtained in our strategic plan, we were able to apply for a rural economic development grant from the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and the town undertook a retail gap analysis. Basically, the retail gap analysis was selected to take place because it's going to help us keep business local, keep our residents local, stop out migration of our residents for their retail needs, and help our retailers know what businesses are seeking and looking for. Through a competitive process, Tate Economic Research, Inc. was selected to undertake the retail gap analysis based on all of their experience, which I think you will get a list later that explains why they were selected from our representatives. Basically, what happened was in 2023, in the autumn, Tate ended up doing an inventory of our retail and service spaces. They analyzed our customer location data. They examined our trade areas, our social economic characteristics. They examined the local regional markets, and they looked at supply and demand. So I'm going to turn it over to Samir, the Vice President of Tate Economic Research, and he's going to provide an overview of the study and the findings. During the session, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, shout them out. We're happy to answer them as they come up. And when the presentation's done, I'm just going to give a brief overview of our next steps. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking your time out of your evening for this. I'm going to present the slides. I did this for council on Monday night, and I was able to do it in 7 minutes and 19 seconds, because that's what council dictates it to be. I've added a couple of slides, so it should be around 9 minutes, but the purpose is hopefully to get through the research and have a conversation or have questions and have this more sort of informal versus me just speaking and everybody listening. So I'd certainly want any sort of feedback as well as questions. As Becky said during the presentation, if you have a question, given that it's so short, maybe we might just want to hold the question till the end, and then we can I can stop sharing my screen and then we can go from there. That makes sense. I'll start now. So as Becky said, and actually with me right now I have Fang Yu, who's also here, and Fang helped with a lot of the background research. So Tate Economic Research is a commercial real estate consultancy. Tate was retained to conduct a retail gap analysis for the town as a whole, and specifically for the commercial districts of Alliston, Beaton, and Tottenham. As you can see from a selection of our experience, we have conducted gap analysis and retail strategies for various municipalities. And this is just in the past 5 years we've done all this work. We've been around since 2003, and our specialty is only a commercial real estate consultancy. So the first part of any gap analysis is to understand the base conditions. And this slide summarizes the commercial inventory in Alliston. The commercial environment in Alliston represents a well-rounded offering, catering to the surrounding residents. When we talk about vacancy, we usually talk about vacancy in terms of square footage. So of note is the vacancy in Alliston is 2.9%, and the typical vacancy rate is between 5 and 7.5%. Therefore, Alliston's low vacancy rate could imply that additional supply is needed. In terms of retail, the category with the most amount of space is general merchandise, and that's a function of the Walmart and Canadian Tire. The category with the largest number of stores is convenience and specialty food stores. In terms of service space, food services and drinking places or restaurants represent the most amount of square footage as well as the largest number of tenants. And when we think about how a retail strip or commercial area operates, we can think about it either as convenience-oriented, which caters to the daily and weekly needs of residents, or more specialty or destination-oriented, which caters to more infrequent shopping. And as can be seen from the graph on the top right, approximately 68% of stores cater to convenience shopping in Alliston. This slide summarizes the commercial space in Beaton. Similar to Alliston, the vacancy rate is below typical levels at 4.6%. The commercial environment in Beaton represents a small, convenience-oriented retail and service offering, which is underlined by the fact that 73% of the stores cater to convenience shopping. This slide summarizes the commercial space in Tottenham. Similar to both Alliston and Beaton, vacancy levels in Tottenham are below typical levels at 3.6%. The commercial environment in Tottenham contains a significant amount of supermarket space. Beyond that, it represents a fairly well-rounded offering catering to the surrounding residents. Similar to both Alliston and Beaton, the majority of stores cater to convenience shoppers. This slide summarizes the customer draw of commercial offerings. So we did this using cellular data. We drew polygons along the main streets as well as some larger retailers, and then we combined those customer draws together to get a combined customer draw for Alliston, Beaton, and Tottenham. So all three communities have a very similar customer draw, which is from the shaded area, and that shaded area represents the surrounding municipalities on the north, south, east, and west. Alliston draws approximately 78% of its shoppers from that shaded area. Beaton draws approximately 74%, and Tottenham draws approximately 76%. So almost 3/4 of shoppers come from the surrounding local area. The difference between the three draws is that Alliston draws a higher percentage of its shoppers from beyond New Tecumseth, which is expected given some of the larger retailers in the community. The main takeaway is that all three communities have a fairly localized trade area and customer draw. Part of our mandate was to also look at demographics, and so they are pretty different, with Alliston and Beaton being similar, and with Beaton and Tottenham being similar and Alliston being pretty different. So Alliston has the oldest population and the smallest household size. The population in Tottenham is significantly younger than Alliston and Beaton, and the households in Beaton have more children than the other two communities. The population in Alliston is more evenly distributed with a significantly more seniors than the other two communities. These are called prism profiles, and prism profiles are, it's done by a firm called Environics, and they take 50 or 60 different variables from tax data, census data, business research, etc., and they create these categories. And the value of the categories is not so much in the actual description of the category, but being able to see how the categories differ between different areas. So both Tottenham and Beaton are largely similar communities. The dominant prism social group in each community is called upper middle suburbia, which represents 90% of the households. And the life stage is similar. So they're called middle-aged families, and 100% of the households are middle-aged families. Conversely, Alliston is more heterogeneous. While the largest prism social group is still upper middle suburbia, it only accounts for 41% of the households, so less than half, versus Tottenham and Beaton, where 90% of those households were upper middle suburbia. Similarly, the middle-aged families only account for 42% of the households. So Alliston represents a far more diverse community than the other two. This is the gap analysis, and this slide represents the resulting gap analysis for Alliston. The red bars represent where a technical gap exists in the market, and this means that resident expenditures in that category are greater than the amount of square footage available or existing required to adequately serve those expenditures. However, not all gaps mean that those retailers should be targeted for attraction. Alliston is a bit different. For instance, you'll see a large gap in building and home supplies. However, in the adjacent municipality, there's a home hardware that's not accounted for in this, as we did it municipal specific. But in some instances, there may not be sufficient population thresholds to fill those gaps, and in others, there may not be enough retailer interest. So really, we should take the gap analysis with a bit of grain of salt, but it allows us to see where the gaps are and where there may be opportunities for attraction. So with respect to Alliston, there is an opportunity to attract more tenants in the furniture and pharmacy categories. However, it should be noted that overall, Alliston is well positioned to serve the future population of growth. And it should also be noted that from our perspective, Victoria Street represents a well-tenanted main street. When dealing with smaller communities such as Beaton, this slide shows the Beaton gap analysis. There will be gaps in most categories as retailers prefer to locate in larger centers. So rather than trying to identify which tenants are in the gaps for a small communities such as Beaton, it's more important to have a retail strategy that identifies how you'd like to position the main street. As a main street, Beaton has the physical characteristics and attributes that could result in a really good specialized destination. These attributes include continuous street facades, good door spacing and block spacing, as well as good street width. This is the gap analysis for Tottenham. In terms of population, Tottenham is almost double the size of Beaton, and therefore there's an opportunity to potentially attract tenants to serve the gaps in the market. As an example, although the graph shows that there are a sufficient number of restaurants, when you think about the socioeconomic demographics, it's apparent that a more family-oriented restaurant could be supported. This is also based on the fact that Tottenham has the youngest median age of the three communities and the highest number of children. Similar to Beaton, a concise retail strategy in terms of how you'd like to position the main street would be helpful. However, unlike Beaton, the retail space on Queen Street is a bit disjointed, and therefore creating a cohesive destination may be more difficult, and there may be a requirement for more sort of public realm interventions in terms of public space, benches, etc. This slide illustrates the surrounding competitive environment. And while we know that New Tecumseth is forecast to experience significant growth, significant population growth, there are also surrounding municipalities that will also have significant population growth. And therefore, I think the focus should be on ensuring Alliston continues to serve the surrounding population, and Beaton and Tottenham develop with unique retailers that can result in a specialty destination. So overall, in terms of a gap analysis strategy, Alliston there could be attraction in furniture and pharmacies, both Beaton and Tottenham, family restaurants and general merchandise. However, Beaton and Tottenham more focus should be on a retail strategy versus trying to fill those gaps. Finally, as a conclusion, we think that Alliston is well positioned for the future. Specifically, the Main Street portion of Victoria Street represents a well-tenanted Main Street with local traffic generators such as banks, libraries, theater, and restaurants. In terms of Beaton, there are only 41 occupied commercial units in Beaton, and as a result of this limited size, a gap analysis is less instructive than for a larger community such as Alliston, and it's inevitable that there will be a number of gaps. And similar to Beaton, Tottenham only has 101 occupied commercial units, and therefore a retail strategy would be more instructive. So that was a lot to take in, and I'm assuming there's a number of questions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I think we can there is a raising hand function if you'd like, and I can sort of bring the slides back up. The actual report, which Becky's going to share with you all, is fairly extensive. I think it's around 80 pages. So there's a lot that didn't make it onto the presentation. But feel free to, once you review the report, if you have additional questions, you can send them through Becky to me. So with that, so I think Becky, you wanted to sort of just talk about next steps, or we can just see if there's questions first.
So I own a business in Beaton, and that's why I'm focusing on this one right now.
Okay.
So basically what you've said in here is that more of family restaurants is what's needed, and it does have the low population in this small community here. But what I'm trying to figure out is like, what do we need to do to try and close those gaps that that are encountered right now?
Sure. So, and there is a, are you part of the BIA? You're a business owner, but are you also
Yes.
part of the BIA management or the board, or is there any BIA?
No, I'm not in the BTI, whatever it is. Sorry, yeah, I'm not in it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there are actions that can be taken. Usually, typically the BIA and economic development would run them, but in terms of different types of opportunities, the biggest one is understanding where the vacant units are. So once you have a good sense of the number of vacant units that are available to be leased, and as we've noticed, there's a really low vacancy rate in all three communities. So one of the issues will be that any new retailer that's looking to locate in any of the three communities is going to have a hard time, because what you really need is a higher vacancy rate. It's counterintuitive, but you need more vacant units that allow retailers for a choice. If you only have 2 or 3 vacant units, there's going to be a lot of retailers that won't like those units for whatever reason, the size.
Right.
So the first thing is we just need to understand the type of vacancies that exist, and then the next step would be to understand when your leases are coming up. So there's no simple way to do this. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of curating of space. So the biggest thing is to understand who the landlords are when vacant space comes up for lease, and being able to know and be able to talk and identify the landlords, the building owners, and be able to have a conversation with them saying that to give the BIA a heads up in terms of when leases are ending and those leases may not get renewed. And then on the BIA and economic development side, having a ready list of tenants that you can pitch to landlords. The difficult part is all of this is private space. And so you need to have an open conversation with landlords and able to sort of say, it's a win-win situation if you're able to bring or have new retailers that come in that lift up the whole main street. Many landlords, building owners may just end up taking the easiest lease that pays the most rent, but that may not, and usually doesn't fit in with the actual vision of the main street. So there has to be and that's one of the things we had said in this was for Beaton and Tottenham that are smaller, a unified vision of what you'd like to see would be helpful first before you sort of start talking to landlords. And that might be, is it can we get a high profile arts and crafts store, or is it a food destination? Could you get 1 or 2 if you got a good restaurant that brings in a lot of people? So, but those strategies are usually community led and business owner led. We can certainly opine on what we think would work or not. That wasn't the mandate of this, but it's certainly, we can't impose that strategy on the business owners. I don't know, did that help?
Yes, it does. And another question I have is, would you know like what, by the town and not necessarily by the store or the business, but would you know what the average square footage retail dollar is?
Oh, Oh, sales per square foot?
Yeah.
We don't have it specifically for the town. We know like industry numbers, but it's very difficult, probably impossible, because retailers never want to share any sales numbers with consultants. So, we know what we use as industry numbers, and those industry numbers would have been used to actually do the gap analysis, because for the gap analysis, we would have taken expenditure, converted that into square footage, and we would have done that using industry standards. So for instance, a supermarket, depending on the type of supermarket, would do anywhere from like $600 to $850 a square foot. And we'd use that to generate the square footage.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Susan, do you still have your hand raised?
I was just going to comment that yes, there is somebody here from the Beaton Tottenham BIA. And that was it. So if there's any questions directed towards me about that, then I'm here.
Thanks, Susan. Alicia, you had a question?
So I'm here as part of the Alliston Business Association, and I totally get the space issue that we do have in town and that our vacancy is low. And one of the things that you're sort of suggesting is that as a BIA, we kind of, engage with the landlords and have a list of folks, which makes a lot of sense. The question is more like, when we receive this gap analysis, will it be a bit more detailed so that, like, if we were trying to figure out right now, for example, Alliston has furniture and pharmacy, right? So, but there's got to be, like, is there more detailed into what we could be bringing to a downtown core to make it vibrant as part of this gap analysis, or?
That's a good question.
So I can handle that. So this is just the first part of the study. So this is just getting the baseline information that we need, and then taking all of that wonderful raw data that's provided in this report to help us with phase 2, which is really going to focus on those other questions. The questions that were brought up about, like, figuring out how we create a unified, creating that branding for Beaton Tottenham, figuring out, okay, we know we need furniture, we know we need pharmacy. Okay, let's figure out, is there somebody local that can do that? Or is there a business already local that wants to expand to take that on? Or do we need to go out and attract a new business? So that, I think, it will be all part of our second phase of the project. That's where through the Healthy Commercial Downtown Committee that we have, that the BIA sit on, that's where we would start those conversations, is be like, okay, we've got the study now, we've done the baseline work, let's figure out the next steps and move forward.
Got it. So that's great. And then I just had one other question more about when you got this data, is it based on sort of like Ontario in general? Like, when you say that the vacancy it's based on other communities of our size, is that how the gap is determined?
No, so,
like, what's your comparable?
So the gap is very specific in terms of, so we take local resident expenditure. So what we do is we take Stats Canada retail expenditure by the various categories. We then use a regression equation to take that Ontario expenditure down to a community level. So it'll be based on Alliston specifically, Beaton specifically. Then we convert those expenditures into square footage, and we take that square footage and then compare that to your actual square footage. So for instance, the expenditure may say that you need, just as a random example, 50,000 square feet of general merchandise, but there's only 20,000 square feet of general merchandise in your community. So there'd be a gap of 30, but it depends also on the size of your community. So for instance, we know that a 30,000 square foot gap of general merchandise isn't going to be able to be fulfilled in Beaton or Tottenham. It's just a function, because although those expenditures are real, but they're spending those dollars in other areas. So they're spending those dollars either in Alliston, some interesting parts, for instance, when we did the customer draw data, we see that there's not many Beaton residents that are seen in Alliston retail. And therefore, does that mean that Beaton residents are either going to Bradford, West Gwillimbury, or somewhere else? Because we know that the community doesn't have a full range of retail. So therefore, there are opportunities, for instance, for Alliston to gain more from Beaton residents. It's not, and the other good thing is that the three communities don't compete because they're very different. So there's the ability to have, to work on all three and not be viewed as competitive communities, because given their size, Alliston, like Beaton and Tottenham, can really develop into these sort of, these nice little niche types of specialized retail main streets, whereas Alliston will always have this larger, more municipal wide draw that includes the Walmart, the Canadian Tire, and all those big retailers.
Okay, got it. No, I was just curious. It's expenditures that make sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. Got it.